For this session, we'll be installing a System Center Orchestrator 1801 installation from the VHD media. So you'll need to first download the VHD media to your system somewhere, extract that, and then prepare a new virtual machine with that VHD disk from the installation. I will not be showing the creation of that VM during this video session, so please read the guides available to see how to do that ahead of time. But let's go ahead and get started. So one of the first things you want to do after you have configured your VHD, you boot it into the system and everything like that. One of the things you want to do actually before you start the installation of the various different tools, you may want to you need to join the system to a domain. You may want to give it a more friendly name. So by default, it just generates a generic randomly generated name. So I'm going to go ahead and rename my system now. So go ahead, click on the name of the computer, and then you hit change. And then I'm going to name the system SCO-SAC1, and then I'm actually going to join it to the domain as well. So in previous videos, we created the new domain of lewistechviews.int. So that's the domain that I'm going to have this system join as well. So go ahead and type that in and hit OK. And then I need to provide credentials that are authoritative on the domain. Go ahead and hit OK. And now I'm on the domain. So I need to go ahead and reboot the system, but once it comes back up, we can go ahead and continue with the installation. So after rebooting the system and after joining the domain, you'll be presented with a screen similar to this. So what we want to do, we actually want to log in using the domain account. So we'll click on Other User and go ahead and type the domain in again, and then the name of the user that we're going to use. In this case, I'm going to just go ahead and use Administrator again. So after a little bit of housekeeping, we should boot back into the desktop. Hi, in this session, we will be setting up a new System Center Orchestrator 1801 server using the VHD evaluation download. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you first thing you have to do, you have to actually extract the VHD and then create a new virtual machine and then attach that drive to the virtual machines. And then once you boot that virtual machine up, you'll be presented with something like this after you provide a username and password. So the first thing that you want to do after you have it installed, or once you first boot and log in for the first time, is that you want to run this configure SQL Server do this first button. So let's go ahead and run that. And what that'll do, that'll go ahead and launch the wizard to get SQL Server 2016 installed to accept your Orchestrator installation. And with this installation, it already has, it's already pretty much pre-built for the most part, so you don't have to do a whole lot. You kind of next through most of the steps. So for the first part, specify a free edition. You kind of put in your licensing information. I'm just going to leave this as evaluation for my purposes. And go ahead and click next. And then you got to accept the license terms. So go ahead and say next. And that'll do a few rule checks. Next, you'll get prompted to see if you want to go and check for updates on Microsoft Update or not. For my purpose, I don't want to do that at this time, so I'm going to go ahead and say next. Then there's a few more rule checks to see if there's any warranty. So it looks like I'm getting 2. So computer cannot access the internet, which is true. So that's fine for my purposes. And then it's just informed me that after this is all set up, I may need to enable some firewall rules or create new ones in order to allow SQL Server to be accessed remotely if I need to. But in this case, this will be a local SQL Server just used for Orchestrator. Technically, I won't really need to open any firewalls or remote access, at least as far as SQL is concerned. So let's go ahead and say next. And now it's just showing me that, hey, there's already a prepared SQL Server 2016 instance within this image, and I'm just kind of going through the motions of completing that setup. So we see the MS SQL Server instance that's here. We can see that it includes the SQL engine as well as analysis services. Looks like it has integration services as well already pre-configured on it. So let's go ahead and say next. And here just showing us what options are already pre-checked on this instance. So as I mentioned, database engine service. We also have analysis services there and integration services. And all of this will just install on the C drive included within this image. So the image that you download for the VHD evaluation is actually, I think it's like 120 gig or 110 gig drive. That's configured as a dynamic disk by default. So in the case of my environment, I did convert it into a fixed disk instead, but you don't have to do that for the purpose of this. But you can see you have 100 gig drive, and I believe there's like 10 gig of space that's not used on the image. So go ahead and say next. Now here on this step, you have an option of configuring your service accounts. So by default, it will go ahead and have these NT service accounts pre-selected for you. So you can actually just leave these as default and continue. But if you have a requirement where you want to use a domain account for any of these services, you can also change that at this time as well. For the purpose of this in time, I'm going to leave everything as the default with these NT service account. But I'm also going to go ahead and check this checkbox for grant perform value maintenance tasks privilege to SQL Server database engine service. This will allow SQL Server to initialize files faster without having to zero out the data pages. So we'll go ahead and continue. As far as collation, we don't need to make any changes here. We'll leave those at default as well, and go ahead and click next. So on this screen, we have where we configure our various different authentication modes. So we can use Windows authentication mode, which is recommended since Orchestrator really only needs to authenticate via Windows authentication mode. But if you have a requirement to use mixed mode, you can always just change that via the radio box there. And also what you can do now here at the bottom, you can add users that will be administrators on the SQL Server instance. So I'm going to go ahead and add my current user. But I'm also going to add a domain user as well. There we go, SQL administrators. So we're going to add that group. So anyone that's in that group will also inherit administrative rights to the SQL Server instances. So over on data directories, if you did have other drives and things like that, you can configure that. But the purpose of this, since this is a VHD that was pre-configured with everything and there's only one of them, I'll allow everything to go to the C drive. And then the same for TempDB. This is out of box. It's kind of inheriting like the default settings based on the hardware that I'm providing to the VM. So it'll split that up automatically based on that. So go ahead and say next. And then I'll also leave this at default. Only thing, I'll just go ahead and add the current user, and then I'll also add that same SQL administrator group to have administrative authority on the analysis services instance. And the same for data directory, we'll install everything on the C drive. Go next. So on this screen, we get a summary of everything that it's about to do. And then also down here at the bottom, we have this configuration file path. So this configuration file will have all the options that I've selected for this installation. So if I wanted to, I could reuse this installation file or this INI file and do another installation of SQL Server. I'm using those same settings I've already configured. So let's go ahead and say complete and allow that to go. So this normally may take a few minutes to complete, but as soon as that finishes, we'll be right back. So after you successfully install your SQL Server, what you can do next is that you can go ahead and kick off the setup for Orchestrator itself, or if you want to use something like service management automation, we also have direct links to the installations for those. And then finally at the bottom you have the setup for Virtual Machine Manager. So Virtual Machine Manager is here because various different components of service management automation as well as Orchestrator may need to integrate or do automation against Virtual Machine Manager. And one of the requirements is that you need to have the Virtual Machine Manager console installed on the same system as your runbook or automation server. That's part of Orchestrator or Service Management Automation. For my purposes, I'm going to only be focusing on Orchestrator. So we're going to go ahead and launch the Orchestrator Setup. So here you're presented with, you can do the install button. That'll just kick you off to the standard wizard. But if you wanted to install individual components of Orchestrator, you have these three options here to do the runbook designer, the console and web service, or independent runbook server. And then also a little bit further down the page, you have your service management automation options if you wanted to install any of those components separately. Again, on the desktop with this VHD, you have direct links to much of that as well. So for my purposes, I'm going to go ahead and hit install right here. Then on the screen, we get presented with some product registration information. So I'm going to go ahead and use administrator for my name, Lewis Tech Views for the organization, and I'm going to leave the product key blank. So when you leave the product key blank, that just puts you into the evaluation mode. So you can run it for, I don't remember the exact amount of days, maybe 180 days, maybe. I'll have to double check that, but it'll go into evaluation mode, and then later, if you do get a product key, you can place that product key in there. Go ahead and say next. So on the screen, go ahead, read through and accept the licensing terms if you agree to them. If not, go ahead and say do not accept, and then you can stop watching the rest of this video. But if you do accept, you can go ahead and say accept license terms, and then go ahead and hit next. And then on this diagnostic and usage data screen, this just gives you some information that the program will automatically collect certain diagnostic and usage data, and then try to submit that data back to Microsoft to help them improve the products. So you can like turn off some of that as time go on, but you can't do it on this screen. It's just telling you that hey, this is what we're doing, and if you want to opt out of that, you can do that at a later date. So on this screen, you go ahead and select all the features that you want to install. Since in my case, this is my first Orchestrator server, so I'm going to go ahead and allow it to install all of the components of Orchestrator on this single server. But at a later date, like say if you want to start scaling out the environment, you can always come back and install additional runbook servers or additional runbook designers, additional web consoles, and things like that. But go ahead and say next. So this is going to go through and check and make sure that I meet all the minimum hardware and software requirements. And if I do, it'll go ahead and continue. So here on this screen, we're going to go ahead and configure the service account that we want to use for Orchestrator to run its services, as well as to access remote services and things like that as needed. So I'm going to go ahead. So for this, you typically do not, well, I would say pretty much never, you don't want to use a domain administrator account for this purposes, because it's against security best practice. So if your service account is running as a domain admin, essentially that automation can do essentially anything on your domain, which is probably not what you really want. So what you want to do is just use kind of a basic domain account that doesn't have domain administrator rights, and then as you find that if there's additional permissions you need on any other systems for that account, you add those to that account as opposed to giving it full rights across your domain. So I'm going to name this account SCO Service. All right. And yeah, that should be good. Oh, and by the way, this is an account that I previously earlier created. Didn't show it during this session, but so for your purposes, you would have to create this account or your domain before you use it. So I've already done that. So I'm going to go ahead and test that account. And so I might have typoed the password. So let me try that again. There we go. Okay. So go ahead and say next. And then here we're going to point it to the database server. So if you recall in the earlier part of this video, we did install a local SQL server. So I'm going to just go ahead and type in the name of the SQL server. Go ahead and test database connection. So database connection succeeded. Go ahead and say next. And then I'm going to go ahead and allow it to create a new database. So since this is a local server, I'm just going to go ahead and use the default name there. Go ahead and say next again. And then here you have an option of creating kind of controlling who has access to Orchestrator. So by default, it creates this local group on the Orchestrator server. So anyone that belongs to that group then have access to pretty much administrative rights within Orchestrator. Another thing you could do, you could have a domain-based account, and then you can add users to that. So you can control it either way. For my purpose, I'm gonna leave it with the local account. But as I mentioned, you could very well change this to be a domain account or a domain group, and then add users to the group that should have authoritative rights. Actually, let's scratch that idea. Let's actually make it a domain account. So let me go ahead and create a new domain group, and then we'll associate that with this part of the program. All right, so I went ahead off screen. You didn't see it, but I made a domain group. So what you're gonna do, go ahead, click browse, and then actually what you want to do, you want to click on location so you can change back to the domain as opposed to the local system. And I'm just gonna go ahead and click on the entire directory and say OK. And now I'm gonna just go type in part of my name. So I use the same name that it uses by default, but I made a domain-based one. So Orchestrator Users Group. I'll go ahead, add that with permissions, and I'll leave everything else the same. Go ahead, click next. And I'll just go ahead and use the default ports for all of the web service components. So we're using port 81 for the web service, and then port 82 for the orchestration console. Go say next. Then I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the default installation path. So if you had like an app drive or app directory where you normally install your programs, you can change that, hit the browse, and point to that location. And this here is just asking that we want to use Microsoft Update to download new patches and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on for now. Even though, well, let's actually turn it off for this system for now, due to the case that this system does not have internet access. So we'll leave that off for now. You can change it or modify it later. And here's just another questionnaire saying, hey, do you want to allow the program to report errors back to Microsoft or not? So you can answer based on your preference. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm not willing to participate. And this just gives you a summary of what it's about to do. And I'm going to go ahead and install. So that'll go ahead and kick off the installation. So this will take a few minutes, and then after that completes, we'll see what the results, if we're successful or not. Alright, so that didn't take very long at all. So it looked like everything installed successfully. And then now here at the bottom you have a few options. If you want to go ahead and try to check for Windows updates right now, you can have that box checked. If you want to go to System Center Orchestrator Online, you can check that box. And then finally, if you wanted to start up Runbook Designer once this closes, you can have it do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and allow it to start up Runbook Designer once I close this out. So hit close. And there we go. So now we're connected to Orchestrator. So now we're ready where we can go and start creating new run books and go from there. So these are kind of the default pieces of run books that are installed. So we have some system activities that we can go and make some automation and connectivity with that. Have some scheduling capability, has the capabilities for monitoring various different aspects of things such as services or IP addresses, disk space, etc. We have some file management options where we can copy files, delete files, move files around, those type of things, print files. Have email capabilities if we wanted to have some automation like send an email or something like that after it finishes. I have some log and notification related things that we can do out of the box. So have some other miscellaneous utilities that we can do like querying databases, writing them to a web page or a database, etc. Some text file management, so if we wanted to add various different texts or look for certain text within a text file of some sort. We have some components where we can do that. And then finally down at the bottom we have the controls for our various different runbooks. So we can have initialized data. So if we want our runbook to have certain data components before it'll start up, we can kind of use some of these methods to do that, or pass data in between various different runbooks. So like we're good to go. It's like we had a successful install. Orchestrator 1801 is up and ready to go. So the next part, we won't do it in this session, but and maybe in a future session, we'll kind of go through the process of importing various different integration packs to add additional functionality and additional automation capabilities to Orchestrator, so we can talk to various different systems and pass data back and forth between them. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.